Playing with Power MTG. Powerful cards, powerful formats. Before we get into tonight's game, I wanted to ask a question. Do you have extra cards lying around that you don't use? Want to buy or trade for some extra cards but don't know how to maximize the value? Then you should try out today's sponsor, Card Conduit. Card Conduit is the best service when it comes to selling your extra cards. Don't waste hours trying to find the best buy list price for your cards online. Simply send them to Card Conduit and let them take care of the rest. I have used Card Conduit multiple times already. I always use them to get the best value for my extra cards. I get fair prices for my cards and they save me tons of time. They have three main services. Their standard service lets you send them your unsorted cards of any value. They will sort, grade, and give you the best price for your cards. Their curated service is similar. Send them your unsorted cards worth over $1 in value. They will charge half the fee of the standard service and charge no fee per card. Their sorted service is a great value as well. Choose cards in advance with their selection tool, send them sorted to Card Conduit, and they will grade and buy list them automatically. Save yourself the time of having to send to multiple sites and let Card Conduit do it instead. Their fee is only 2% with no fee per card. They give you the best price for your cards. They work with competitive buy listing partners, including ones not open to the public. Users get an average of 19% more for their collection than they would from any major retail buy list, even with Card Conduit's fees. Card Conduit also optimizes buy listing for card condition as well. Since vendors have different penalties for wear and tear, Card Conduit will find the best buy list priced against the specific condition of the card. So give Card Conduit a try today. If you sign up with my link in the description below or use the promo code POWER, you will also get 10% off of their fees when you use their service. A big thanks to Card Conduit for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Sean piloting the partner pair of Pure Imaginative Rascal and Toothy Imaginary Friend. This deck seeks to put a lot of counters onto Toothy, flicker it for massive card draw, and then win with a Lab Man effect. Sean's opening hand contains an Elvish Mystic, Mystical Tutor, Displacer Kitten, Ghostly Flicker, Waterlogged Grove, Mana Crypt, and an Ancient Tomb. Next, we have Zeb piloting Lotho, Corrupt Sheriff. This deck seeks to gain mana through its commander and win with an Aristocrat-style loop. Zeb's opening hand contains an Entomb, Soul Ring, Necromancy, Caves of Koilos, Springleaf Drum, Lotus Petal, and his Linda Mulligan is a Drannith Magistrate. After that, we have Nabil piloting the partner pair of Francisco Foul Marauder and Kraum Ludovic's Opus. This deck seeks to use Francisco, Agatha's Soul Cauldron, and Walking Ballista to machine gun the table. Nabil's opening hand contains a Dockside Extortionist, Talisman of Creativity, Training Center, Grim Monolith, Steam Vents, and their London Mulligans are Force of Will and Ottawara Soaring City. Finally, we have Ryan piloting the partner pair of Tymna the Weaver and Jeska Thrice Reborn. This deck seeks to grind advantage with its commanders before creating infinite mana and burning out the table with Jeska. Ryan's opening hand contains a Touch the Spirit Realm, Vampiric Tutor, Scalding Tarn, Wishclaw Talisman, Last Chance, Mana Vault, and a Dark Ritual. Without further ado, let's kick off this perfect purview of pixelated paper pounding. They Rochambeau to see who goes first, and Sean gets to start us off. Sean draws a card for turn and plays a Waterlogged Grove. He taps it to help cast an Elvish Mystic. He casts a Mana Crypt. Sean passes. Zeb draws and plays an Arid Mesa. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Scrubland onto the battlefield. He casts a Lotus Petal. He casts his commander, Lotho, Corrupt Sheriff. He passes. Nabil draws and plays a Steam Vents into play untapped, paying 2 life. Nabil passes to Ryan. Ryan draws and plays a Scalding Tarn. He casts a Mana Crypt. He casts a Mana Vault. Lotho triggers and Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure. He cracks his Scalding Tarn, pays a life, and fetches up a Badlands onto the battlefield. He casts a Wishclaw Talisman. It enters, and Ryan ends his turn. During his upkeep, Sean wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. He taps his Waterlogged Grove to help cast Gilded Drake. It enters and exchanges control of Zeb's Lotho. He taps Ancient Tomb to help cast his commander, Pure Imaginative Rascal. Lotho triggers and Sean loses a life and creates a treasure. All through, Sean passes to Zeb. Zeb draws and plays a Caves of Koilos for turn. He casts a Soul Ring. He moves to combat and attacks Sean with Gilded Drake. Sean takes it and Zeb ships the turn. Nabil draws and plays a Training Center. They cast Dockside Extortionist. It enters, and in response, Sean cracks his treasure. Then Nabil creates 6 treasures. They cast their commander, Kraum Ludovic's Opus. Lotho triggers, and Sean loses a life and creates a treasure. Nabil moves to combat and attacks Ryan with Kraum. Ryan takes it, and Nabil passes the turn. During his upkeep, Ryan loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. He draws and activates Wishclaw Talisman, fetching up a card into his hand and giving Wishclaw to Zeb. He casts Dark Ritual, adding 3 black. He casts Ad Nauseam. Lotho and Kraum trigger, Nabil draws, then Sean loses a life and creates a treasure. Ad Naus resolves, and Ryan reveals a Talisman of Indulgence, Godless Shrine, Orcish Bowmasters, Lightning Bolt, Dam, Grand Abolisher, Opposition Agent, Mana Confluence, Spectator Seating, Silence, Twin Flame, Mox Opal, Scrubland, Dotthy Voidwalker, Jeska's Will, Rite of Flame, Bloodstained Mire, Charismatic Conqueror, and the One Ring, deciding to stop there. He casts Mox Opal. He plays a Scrubland for turn. He casts Rite of Flame, adding 2 red. He casts Last Chance, getting an extra turn. He casts Talisman of Indulgence. He passes to himself, discarding to hand size. During his upkeep, Ryan loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. Still in his upkeep, Zeb casts Entomb, fetching up a Ranger Captain of Eos into his graveyard. He flushes in a Necromancy. Kraum and Lotho trigger, Sean loses a life and creates a treasure, then Nabil draws. Then Zeb puts Ranger Captain onto the battlefield. Ranger Captain enters, and Zeb fetches up an Esper Sentinel into his hand. He activates Ranger Captain, sacrificing it. In response, Sean casts Mystical Tutor, fetching up a Time Twister onto the top of his library. Ryan then sinks his head, and Ranger Captain's ability resolves, locking out opponents from non-creature spells this turn. During his draw step, Ryan takes the damage from his Mana Ball. He plays a Spectator's Eating. Unfortunately locked out, Ryan moves to his end step and loses the game. During his upkeep, Sean wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and taps his Waterlogged Grove to help cast his other commander, Toothy, Imaginary Friend. In response, Nabil casts Red Elemental Blast, countering Toothy. He taps his Ancient Tomb to help cast Oko, Thief of Crowns. Lotho and Kraum trigger, Nabil draws, and Sean loses a life and creates a treasure. Sean activates Oko's second ability, Elking Nabil's Kraum. He moves to combat and attacks Zeb with Lotho. Zeb takes it, and Sean ends his turn. Zeb draws and casts Esper Sentinel. He casts Springleaf Drum. Lotho triggers, and Sean loses a life and creates a treasure. He moves to combat and attacks Oko with Gilded Drake. Oko takes it, and in his second main phase, Zeb casts Dance of the Dead. It enters, and Zeb returns Ranger Captain of Eos to the battlefield. Ranger Captain enters, and Zeb fetches up a Serra Ascendant into his hand. All through, Zeb passes to Nabil. Nabil draws and plays a Polluted Delta. They crack it, pay a life, and fetch up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. Nabil moves to combat and attacks Oko with their Elked Kraum and Dockside. Oko dies, and in their second main phase, Nabil casts a Talisman of Creativity. Esper triggers, and Zeb draws. Nabil casts Jeweled Lotus. Lotho triggers, and Sean loses a life and creates a treasure. Nabil casts Grim Monolith. They pay 2 life to help cast Phyrexian Metamorph. It enters as a copy of Kraum, and Nabil puts the original into the command zone. Nabil gives the turn to Sean. During its upkeep, Sean loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and taps Waterlogged Grove and Ancient Tomb to help recast his commander, Toothy. He casts Time Twister. Lotho, Esper, and Kraum trigger, Nabil and Zeb draw, then Sean loses a life and creates a treasure. In response, Zeb sacrifices Ranger Captain, locking out opponents from non-creature spells this turn. Then each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library and draws 7. Toothy triggers 7 times and gets 14 +1/+1 counters through Pier. He plays a Snow-Covered Forest for turn. He moves to combat and attacks Zeb with Lotho. Zeb takes it, and Sean ships the turn. Zeb draws and plays a Forbidden Orchard. He casts Talisman of Hierarchy. He casts Blind Obedience. Kraum and Lotho trigger, Sean loses a life and creates a treasure, then Nabil draws. He taps Forbidden Orchard, giving Nabil a spirit to help cast Grand Abolisher. In response, Sean casts Planar Incision, targeting Toothy. Toothy flickers and enters with 2 counters through Pier. Toothy triggers, and Sean draws 14 cards. Toothy triggers again, and Sean adds 28 counters to Toothy through Pier. Finished up, Zeb passes. During their upkeep, Nabil casts Vampiric Tutor. Esper triggers, and Zeb draws. In response, Sean pays 2 life to cast Mental Misstep, targeting Tutor. Esper triggers, and Zeb draws again. Then Misstep counters Tutor. Nabil draws and plays a Bloodstained Mire. They crack it, pay a life, and fetch up a Watery Grave onto the battlefield untapped, paying 2 life. They cast Counterbalance. Lotho triggers, and Sean loses a life and creates a treasure. In response, Sean casts Force of Negation for its alternate cost, exiling a blue card. Lotho triggers, and Sean loses a life and creates a treasure again. In response, Nabil casts Swan Song, targeting Force. In response, Sean casts an Offer You Can't Refuse, targeting Counterbalance. Offer counters Counterbalance, Nabil creates 2 treasures, and Swan Song counters Force of Negation, and Sean creates a 2/2 bird. Next, Nabil cracks Jeweled Lotus to help cast their commander, Francisco, Foul Marauder. Nabil moves to combat and attacks Sean with Dockside and Kraum. Sean blocks Dockside with Pier and takes the rest. Pier dies, and in their second main phase, Nabil casts Deadly Relic for its alternate cost, targeting Toothy. In response, Sean casts Mindbreak Trap for its alternate cost, exiling the spell. With no other answers, Nabil passes to Sean. During his upkeep, Sean wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws, Toothy triggers, and gets a counter. He casts Displacer Kitten. He casts Mox Opal. Displacer Kitten, Lotho, Esper, and Kraum trigger. Nabil draws, Sean taps Ancient Tomb to pay for Esper, Sean loses a life and creates a treasure, then Displacer Kitten flickers Toothy. Toothy flickers, triggers, and Sean draws 31 cards. Then Mox Opal resolves and enters tap through Blind Obedience. He casts a Jeweled Lotus. Displacer Kitten flickers Toothy, and Sean draws 31 more cards. He casts Laboratory Maniac. He casts Mox Diamond. Kitten flickers Toothy, and Sean attempts to draw from an empty library, and Sean wins the game. In Game 2, Zeb's opening hand contains an Ancient Tomb, Swamp, Verdant Catacombs, Urza's Saga, Chrome Mox, Bolas' Citadel, and a Takenuma Abandoned Mire. Nabil's opening hand contains a Walking Ballista, Imperial Seal, Badlands, Ancient Tomb, Watery Grave, and their London mulligans are Cursed Mirror and Jeska's Will. Ryan's opening hand contains a Jeweled Lotus, Dark Ritual, Imperial Seal, Marsh Flats, Lotus Petal, Vampiric Tutor, and a Soul Ring. Sean's opening hand contains a Neoform, Soul Ring, Sensei's Divining Top, Snow-Covered Forest, Verdant Catacombs, and his London mulligans are Pongify and Mana Drain. And Zeb gets to start us off. Zeb draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Scrubland onto the battlefield. He casts Chrome Mox and printing Agadeem's Awakening. He casts his commander, Lotho, Corrupt Sheriff. He passes. Nabil draws and plays a Watery Grave into play untapped, paying 2 life. They cast Imperial Seal. They fetch up a card onto the top of their library and lose 2 life. Nabil ships the turn. Ryan draws and plays a Marsh Flats. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Scrubland onto the battlefield. He casts a Soul Ring and ships the turn. Sean draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Tropical Island onto the battlefield. He casts a Soul Ring. He casts a Sensei's Divining Top. Lotho triggers and Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure. Sean activates top, looking at and rearranging the top 3. Sean ends his turn. Zeb draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. He casts a Mox Opal. He taps Ancient Tomb to help cast Bolas' Citadel. Lotho triggers and Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure. Zeb looks at the top card of his library through Citadel and passes the turn. Nabil draws and plays a Badlands. They cast their commander, Francisco, Foul Marauder. Nabil ships the turn. During his upkeep, Ryan casts Vampiric Tutor. He fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. He draws and casts a Lotus Petal. Lotho triggers and Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure. He casts Charismatic Conqueror. He casts a Jeweled Lotus. He cracks it to help cast his commander, Jeska, Thresh Reborn. It enters with 1 loyalty, and Ryan activates Jeska's second ability, pinging Lotho, Francisco, and Zeb. Both creatures die, and Ryan passes. Sean draws and plays a Breeding Pool into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts his commander, Pyr, Imaginary Friend. Pyr enters, Charismatic Conqueror triggers, and Sean taps it. Sean ends his turn. Zeb draws and pays 3 life to cast Toxic Deluge from the top of his library through Bolas' Citadel, paying 2 life as an additional cost. All creatures get -2/-2, wiping the board. Next, Zeb pays 2 life to cast Fracture through Citadel, destroying Sean's Soul Ring. Zeb pays a life to cast Silence through Citadel. In response, Sean activates top, rearranging the top 3. Silence resolves, locking out opponents this turn. Zeb pays 3 life to cast Buried Alive through Citadel. He fetches up an Abdel Adrian, Gorian's Ward, Loyal Retainers, and a Razaketh the Foul-Blooded into his graveyard. He plays a Marsh Flats. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Plains onto the battlefield. He floats mana through Mox Opal, then pays 4 life to cast a Bargain Beseech the Mirror through Citadel, sacrificing Mox Opal as an additional cost. He fetches up and casts Animate Dead. It enters, and Zeb returns Abdel Adrian to the battlefield. Abdel Adrian enters, and Zeb exiles Animate Dead, creating a soldier. Animate Dead triggers, and Zeb sacrifices Abdel Adrian. Animate Dead enters, and Zeb returns Abdel Adrian to the battlefield. He presents a loop of exiling Animate Dead with Abdel Adrian, creating a soldier, then sacrificing Abdel, returning Animate Dead to the battlefield. He creates infinite soldiers. Still in this loop, he activates Bolas' Citadel, sacrificing 10 soldiers, having each opponent lose 10 life. He then uses Abdel Adrian to exile and return Bolas' Citadel to the battlefield untapped. He activates Bolas' Citadel through this loop over and over, draining the table, and Zeb wins the game. In this game, Nabil's opening hand contains a Volcanic Island, Ancient Tomb, Fellwar Stone, Imperial Seal, Polluted Delta, and their London mulligans are Mnemonic Betrayal and Bloodstained Mire. Ryan's opening hand contains a Serra Ascendant, Lightning Bolt, Witchclaw Talisman, Mana Confluence, Sacred Foundry, and his London mulligans are Last Chance and Polluted Delta. Sean's opening hand contains an Elvish Mystic, March of Swirling Mist, the One Ring, Muddle the Mixture, Finale of Devastation, Command Tower, and a Snow-Covered Forest. Zeb's opening hand contains a Vampiric Tutor, Mox Diamond, Phyrexian Tower, Beseech the Mirror, Archivist of Ogma, and his London mulligans are Loyal Retainers and Blind Obedience. And Nabil gets to start us off. Nabil draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. They cast a Fellwar Stone and pass the turn. Ryan draws and plays a Sacred Foundry into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts a Serra Ascendant. Ryan ends his turn. Sean draws and plays a Flooded Strand. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Tropical Island onto the battlefield. He casts Elvish Mystic and gives the turn to Zeb. Zeb draws and casts a Mox Diamond, discarding Phyrexian Tower. Zeb passes. Nabil draws and plays a Bloodstained Mire. They crack it, pay a life, and fetch up a Badlands onto the battlefield. They cast Imperial Seal. They fetch up a card onto the top of their library and lose 2 life. Nabil ships the turn. Ryan draws and plays a Mana Confluence. He boots to combat and attacks Nabil with Serra Ascendant. Nabil takes it, and Ryan gains 6 life. Ryan passes. Sean draws and plays a Command Tower. He holds open mana and passes the turn. At the end of Sean's turn, Zeb casts Vampiric Tutor. He fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. The turn moves to Zeb. Zeb draws and plays an Arid Mesa. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Scrubland onto the battlefield. He casts his commander, Lotho, Corrupt Sheriff. Zeb passes. Nabil draws and plays a Polluted Delta. They crack it, pay a life, and fetch up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. Nabil taps Ancient Tomb to cast their commander, Kraum, Ludovic's Opus. Nabil passes to Ryan. Ryan draws and plays a Phyrexian Tower for turn. He taps Mana Confluence to upcast his commander, Tymna the Weaver. He moves to combat and attacks Zeb with Serra Ascendant. Zeb takes it, and Ryan gains 6 life. In his second main phase, Ryan pays a life and draws a card through Tymna. Ryan passes to Sean. Sean draws and plays a Snow-Covered Forest. He casts the One Ring. It enters, and Sean gains protection from everything. He activates the One Ring, adding a burn encounter and drawing a card. Sean ends his turn. Zeb draws and casts a Soul Ring. He passes. Nabil draws and plays a Volcanic Island. They tap Ancient Tomb to help cast Rhystic Study. Nabil moves to combat and attacks Ryan with Kraum. Ryan takes it, and Nabil ships the turn. Ryan draws and moves to combat. He attacks Zeb with Serra Ascendant and Nabil with Tymna. They both take it, and Ryan gains 8 life. In his second main phase, he pays 2 life and draws 2 cards through Tymna. He plays an Arid Mesa and passes the turn. During his upkeep, Sean loses a life to the One Ring. He draws and plays a Mana Confluence. He casts its commander, Pure Imaginative Rascal. Rhystic triggers and Nabil draws. He activates the One Ring, adding 2 counters through Pure and drawing 3 cards. He casts Mystic Remora. Lotho and Kraum trigger, Nabil draws, and Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure. Sean passes, discarding to hand size. Zeb draws and casts Drannith Magistrate, paying their Rhystic tax. Zeb passes. Nabil draws and plays a City of Traders. They cast Thassa's Oracle. They hold priority and cast Demonic Consultation. Remora and Lotho trigger, Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure, then Sean draws a card. In response, Ryan cracks his Arid Mesa and pays a life. In response, Zeb flashes in an Archivist of Ogma. Rhystic triggers and Nabil draws. Then Ryan fetches up a Badlands onto the battlefield. Archivist triggers and Zeb gains a life and draws a card. Still in response, Ryan activates Phyrexian Tower, sacrificing Serra Ascendant, adding 2 black. He taps Mana Confluence to cast an Ad Nauseam. Mystic and Rhystic trigger, and Nabil and Sean draw. In response, Sean taps Mana Confluence to cast Swansong, targeting Consultation. Swansong counters Consult, Nabil creates a bird, and Ad Nauseam resolves. Ryan reveals a Grand Abolisher, Cabal Ritual, Talisman of Hierarchy, Silence, Mox Diamond, Praetor's Grasp, Calling the Weak, Plateau, Grim Monolith, Felwar Stone, Underworld Breach, Dockside Extortionist, Gemstone Caverns, Wooded Foothills, Grim Tutor, The One Ring, Esper Sentinel, Scalding Tarn, Mana Crypt, Beseech the Mirror, Drannith Magistrate, Bergi God of Storytelling, Simeon Spirit Guide, Pyroblast, and Allurus of the Dream Den, deciding to stop there. Then Thassa's Oracle resolves, Nabil looks at the top 4, putting 1 on top and the rest on bottom. Nabil moves to combat and attacks Ryan with Kraum. Ryan goes to 1, and in their second main phase, Nabil casts Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Remora triggers and Sean draws. Nabil passes to Ryan. Ryan draws and casts Silence. Remora and Rhystic trigger and both players draw. Silence resolves, locking out players from casting spells this turn. Ryan casts a Mana Crypt. Mystic, Lotho, and Rhystic trigger, Nabil draws, Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure, then Sean draws. Ryan casts a Grim Monolith and both players draw. He casts a Cloudstone Curio and both players draw again. He casts Dockside Extortionist and Nabil draws. It enters and Ryan creates 9 treasures. Ryan exiles Simeon Spirit Guide from his hand, adding a red. He casts Pyroblast, targeting Remora. Remora triggers and Sean draws. Then Remora is destroyed. Ryan casts Drannith Magistrate, paying for Rhystic. It enters, Cloudstone Curio triggers, and Ryan bounces Dockside to his hand. He presents a loop of casting and bouncing both Dockside and Drannith through Curio, paying for Rhystic, netting more and more treasures each time. He casts Lightning Bolt, killing Zeb's Drannith. Ryan casts his commander, Jeska, Thrice Reborn, paying for Rhystic. He activates Jeska's second ability, where X equals 2, killing Jeska, dealing 2 to each opponent. He presents another loop of casting Jeska over and over, using her second ability to burn each opponent. He does this over and over until the table is dead, and Ryan wins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what a fun set of games tonight. Congrats to Sean, Zeb, and Ryan on their wins. In Game 1, Sean let each opponent stop one another's win attempt before finding his moment, drawing tons of cards, and winning the game. In Game 2, Zeb had a blazing fast start with Bolas' Citadel and some awesome rips off of the top. His knowledge of his deck allowed him to sequence his plays perfectly. In Game 3, when Nabil's win was on the stack, Ryan had the perfect opportunity to let his Ad Nauseam through due to the choice of either stopping it or the win. It worked out, and Ryan closed it out shortly after. The most valuable card in tonight's games, sponsored by Luxury Playstyle, goes to Lotho, Corrupt Sheriff. This was a tough one to decide in tonight's matches. Each player had a wide swath of cards that let them progress their game plans. It was this card, however, that allowed Zeb, and even Sean, to jump ahead in resources very early on. It goes without saying that this is an amazing advantage engine, and we understand why Zeb runs it in the command zone. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time when we duke it out to see who will be king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.